Deputy Noah Grayson believed he was only bringing his wheelchair-bound mother to a quiet animal shelter to escape the silence that had filled their home since his father's death. She didn't want a pet. She wanted her life back. But when they reached the final kennel, everything stopped. Inside was a massive German shepherd, scarred, snarling, and labeled unadoptable. The dog hurled himself at the bars, teeth flashing, until Noah stepped closer. Then something impossible happened. The growling stopped. The dog froze, eyes locked on Noah's face, trembling like he had seen a ghost. Hanging from a rusted collar was a K-9 training code Noah hadn't seen in years. The same partner lost in a deadly avalanche. Declared gone forever. How did this dog survive? Why was he here? And could a broken mother and a forgotten K-9 heal each other when winter had taken everything else? What happens next will restore your faith in loyalty, miracles, and second chances. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support truly means everything to us. Snow fell over Pine Hollow, Idaho, quietly and without drama, settling into the valley as if the world itself were trying not to wake old grief that had learned how to sleep lightly. Deputy Noah Grayson, 34 years old, drove the county pickup along the narrow, whitewashed road with the practiced caution of a man who had learned that winter never forgave impatience. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built more by labor than by the gym, with a long face cut by sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked perpetually clenched, as if he were always holding something back. His dark hair, usually trimmed regulation short, had grown slightly uneven at the temples, threaded with early gray. He pretended not to notice. A faint scar ran along his right eyebrow, left by a car door during a roadside arrest years earlier, and gave his gaze a permanent intensity that made people speak more carefully around him. Noah wasn't unkind, but grief and duty had sanded down his edges. He spoke less than he felt and listened more than he answered. On the passenger seat lay a folded wool blanket, brown and worn thin in the middle. In the truck bed, secured carefully with straps, rested a folded wheelchair, lightweight aluminum, scratched at the footrests, evidence of recent use. Noah glanced at it through the rear-view mirror more often than he checked the speedometer. His mother, Evelyn Grayson, 62, sat beside him in silence. She had once been a military field nurse, the kind who could thread an IV by flashlight and keep her voice calm while men screamed around her. That woman still existed, somewhere beneath the years. But winter had changed her. An icy fall the previous season had left her lower spine damaged, confining her to the wheelchair for long stretches. Her posture remained upright, disciplined, but her body had grown thinner, folded inward as if conserving strength. Evelyn's hair, once a deep chestnut, had faded into soft silver, cut short at the nape for practicality. Her skin was pale and weathered, marked by fine lines that came not from vanity neglected, but from time endured. Her eyes, clear blue, almost painfully alert, still missed very little, though lately they seemed to rest on things that were no longer there. She wore a heavy olive coat with a frayed collar and leather gloves she had owned longer than Noah's career. Her hands, when they rested on her lap, trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from something quieter and heavier. Her husband, Noah's father, had died less than 6 months earlier. Cancer had taken him with the slow patience of winter itself. Since then, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow had grown cavernous, every ticking clock sounding like an accusation that time was still moving when part of her had stopped. Noah cleared his throat once as the truck climbed toward the outskirts of town. "Silver Ridge isn't far," he said, keeping his tone light. "Thought we could just look." Evelyn didn't turn her head. "I don't need another animal," she replied, voice even, controlled. "I need your father back." Noah tightened his grip on the wheel. He had no answer to that, and both of them knew it. Death, in his experience, didn't bargain. The Silver Ridge Animal Shelter sat low against the trees, its long metal roof burdened with snow. A hand-painted sign leaned slightly in front, letters faded but careful, like someone still tried. Inside, warmth rushed at them, carrying the layered smells of disinfectant, damp fur, and old hay. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering just enough to make the shadows along the walls feel restless. Barking echoed through the corridor, not frantic but constant, like voices that had been practicing the same story for too long. A woman emerged from the back room, pushing a mop bucket with one foot. Dr. Claire Morgan, 38, moved with the weary efficiency of someone used to triage. She was tall, with a lean, athletic build and shoulders that carried more responsibility than sleep. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands already escaping, and faint freckles dusted her nose and cheeks. Claire's green eyes held a practiced gentleness, though the lines at their corners betrayed how often she had learned to say goodbye. Her scrubs were hidden beneath a quilted vest, and a stethoscope hung around her neck like a quiet promise she kept making to strangers. "Well," Claire said, managing a smile that warmed despite its fatigue, "anyone who comes out in weather like this either wants a dog or needs one." Noah returned the smile politely. "Just visiting. This is my mom, Evelyn." Claire's expression softened as she nodded toward Evelyn. "Welcome. We don't get many visitors who don't come looking for miracles." She paused, then added gently, "But sometimes they happen anyway." They moved down the long corridor of kennels, dogs pressed against steel bars, tails wagging, paws scraping metal, eyes bright with hope or dulled by waiting. Noah slowed at times, murmuring soft greetings, but Evelyn kept her gaze forward, jaw set, as if afraid that meeting any of those eyes would require something she could not give. At the very end of the hall, Claire stopped. The noise seemed to pull inward here, like the air before a storm. "This one," she said quietly, "hasn't been easy." The kennel was larger than the others. Inside stood a German shepherd, massive and tense, his coat a tangled mix of charcoal, black, and weathered gray. He was older, Noah guessed 7 or 8, with scars mapped across his body like stories he didn't tell. One ear bore a jagged notch, and a pale line ran along his chest, where fur refused to grow back. His amber eyes burned sharp and intelligent, fixed instantly on Noah. When he lunged, the impact rattled the bars, a low growl rolling from his chest, deep and thunderous, not wild but deliberate. A rusted collar hung loosely around his neck. On it, scratched and nearly worn smooth, was a single name, Rook. Noah took an unconscious step closer. Something in the sound, the cadence, the restraint, felt wrong, or rather familiar, and then the dog froze. The growl died in his throat. Rook's body stiffened, ears tilting forward, as if recalibrating reality. His gaze locked onto Noah's face with sudden intensity, pupils narrowing. For a long second, nothing moved. The hallway noise seemed to recede, swallowed by the space between man and dog. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the armrest of her wheelchair. Her breath caught. She had seen aggression before, true senseless violence, but this wasn't it. What stared back at her from behind those amber eyes was recognition tangled with pain, grief, wearing teeth because it didn't know what else to do. Claire frowned softly. "That's new," she murmured. "He hasn't stopped like that for anyone." Noah crouched slightly, heart pounding. "Easy," he said, voice low, steady, the way he used to speak into a radio when things went wrong. "It's okay." Rook didn't advance. He didn't retreat. He simply stood there, trembling almost imperceptibly, as if something buried deep inside him had just stirred and didn't yet know whether to wake or hide. Outside, snow continued to fall, patient and unrelenting, layering the valley in white. It fell on roads and roofs and memories alike, as though the sky itself were holding its breath, waiting to see whether this meeting, this impossible pause, would become a beginning or another quiet loss. Noah recognized the collar not because of the name Rook, but because of what was carved into the inside of the rusted metal, a faded K-9 training code he had once memorized without thinking, the kind of number that lodged itself in muscle memory and refused to leave. He didn't touch it at first. He simply stared, breath shallow, as if the air inside the shelter had thinned without warning. 2 winters ago, a mountain patrol had vanished under an avalanche along Granite Pass. The official report read clinical and final. 1 deputy deceased, 1 K-9 missing, presumed lost. Noah had stood at the edge of the search zone until his boots froze through, listening to radios hiss with static and hope evaporate by the hour. When the call came to suspend recovery, he had nodded like a good officer, then buried the sound of it beneath overtime shifts and sleepless nights. Seeing that code now felt like pulling a blade halfway out of old wood, enough to bleed, not enough to heal. Claire Morgan watched his face carefully. Years of shelter work had taught her how recognition moved through people. First disbelief, then fear, then the quiet panic that came when my memory refused to stay buried. She leaned against the kennel door, arms crossed loosely over her vest. Up close, the lines of exhaustion around her eyes were clearer, etched by long nights and too many animals that hadn't made it. "He came in last spring," she said, voice measured. "A hunter found him about 15 miles north of here. Snowmelt season. He was skeletal, limping, and half feral. Wouldn't let anyone close, especially men." She paused, glancing at Rook, who stood rigid but silent. "We sedated him once to treat an infected wound. After that, we stopped trying to force anything. He reacts badly to metal sounds, fuel smells, radios, and uniforms." Noah exhaled slowly. "He was trained to search avalanche debris," he said. "Sirens, radios, machinery, it was his world." He swallowed, until it wasn't. Evelyn listened without interrupting. From her wheelchair, she studied the dog the way she used to study patients in triage, not with sentiment but with assessment. Rook's posture told her more than his scars. Weight shifted forward, muscles coiled, not to attack, but to flee if cornered. Survival, not aggression. She had seen that stance on 19-year-old soldiers with rifles shaking in their hands. She had seen it in mirrors since her husband died. When Claire hesitated again, Evelyn spoke, her voice abrupt and roughened by disuse. If he's broken, she said, so am I, and I'm still standing. The words landed harder than Evelyn intended. Noah turned toward her, startled, seeing not the fragile woman Winter had narrowed, but the field nurse who once barked orders through mortar fire. For a moment he saw his mother as she had been, spine straight, eyes sharp, refusing to collapse even when the ground did. Claire nodded slowly, something like relief passing through her face. "I won't lie to you," she said. "This won't be easy. He's not a pet. He's a war that didn't end when it should have." Noah signed the foster paperwork with a hand that barely trembled. 30 days. Evaluation required. Immediate return if safety was compromised. He read every line twice, not because he didn't understand, but because committing to it felt like reopening a door he had welded shut. When Claire unlocked the kennel, Rook didn't bolt. He stepped out cautiously, head lowered, tail stiff but not tucked. His paws touched the concrete as if it might collapse beneath him. Noah clipped on a new leash, careful, deliberate. Rook flinched at the metallic click, then steadied when Noah's hand didn't yank or rush. Outside, snow had softened into fine mist, clinging to coats and eyelashes alike. The drive home passed in a silence that felt sharp enough to cut. The pickup moved smoothly along the road, tires hissing against wet slush. Noah kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the leash, ready but not gripping. In the rearview mirror, Rook sat rigid in the back seat, eyes tracking every curve of the road. Evelyn watched him too, her reflection faint beside his. Their gazes met once, held, then settled into something quieter. There was no affection in it yet, only recognition, as if both understood what it meant to be carried forward by momentum when you would have preferred to stop. Evelyn's house stood at the edge of Pine Hollow, a low timber structure with a sagging porch and wind chimes that hadn't been touched since her husband's funeral. Noah unfolded the wheelchair with practiced care, the metal joints clicking softly. Rook stiffened at the sound, but didn't growl. He simply watched, ears twitching, cataloging threats that never came. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine cleaner and cold air trapped in wood. Evelyn's late husband still seemed present in the details, the coat on the hook, the boots by the door. Rook paused at the threshold, nose working, then stepped inside like a soldier entering unfamiliar shelter. That night the house creaked and settled around them. Rook lay near the front door, refusing the blanket Noah offered, eyes half open. Evelyn remained in the living room, wheelchair angled toward the darkened window. She hadn't spoken much since arriving home. Noah pretended to check messages on his phone, but his attention kept drifting to the space between them, the dog and the woman, both waiting for something neither could name. When a branch snapped under the weight of ice outside, Rook's body went taut, breath hitching. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried the wrong shape. Metal followed, a loose gutter rattling in the wind. Rook surged, scrambling against the wall, nails skidding on hardwood. His breath came fast, shallow, eyes blown wide as if the room had become a canyon filling with white. "No, no," Noah said, softly, rising too fast. He stopped himself, lowering his hands, remembering training that didn't come from manuals. But before he could reach the dog, Evelyn rolled forward, the wheelchair's rubber tires whispered over the floor. She didn't rush. She didn't speak at first. She simply extended her gloved hand, palm open, steady despite the faint tremor that had haunted her for months. "Easy," she said, voice low and rough. You're inside. This is a house. Rook's chest heaved. His growl fractured into a sound closer to a whine. He crawled forward inch by inch until his forehead pressed against Evelyn's knee. She laid her hand on his back, feeling the tension shudder beneath coarse fur. To Noah's shock, her hand stilled. The tremor vanished, as if the act of grounding someone else had anchored her too. For a long moment the only sound was the wind outside, and the slow sinking of breath, dog and woman finding a shared rhythm. Rook did not eat that night. He drank water, then returned to the door, guarding nothing and everything at once. Evelyn slept in the living room, insisting on it, her chair angled so she could see him if he moved. Morning brought pale light and a thin crust of frost on the windows. Noah brewed coffee while Rook paced, uneasy but quieter. Evelyn watched him with the same attention she once gave wounded men learning to walk again. "He's not violent," she said finally. "He's remembering." Noah nodded, throat tight. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. Tom Hensley, the neighbor from 2 houses down, stood on the porch with a bag of groceries in one hand. He was in his late 50s, broad and stooped, with a gray beard that looked like it had been trimmed by habit rather than care. Tom had lost his brother to a logging accident years earlier, and grief had made him blunt but kind. He froze when he saw Rook behind Noah, ears pricked, body tense. "Didn't know you had a dog," Tom said carefully. "Temporary," Noah replied. Rook growled once, low and warning. Tom raised his hands and backed up, nodding. "I'll come back another time." Evelyn watched the exchange from her chair, face unreadable. When the door closed, she sighed. "He'll need time," she said. "So will we." That night, Rook slept for the first time, curled against the door, twitching softly as if running through snow he couldn't escape. Evelyn stayed awake, listening. She realized with a dull ache that it was the first time since her husband's death that she wasn't alone with her thoughts. The house felt occupied again, not by noise or joy, but by presence. And presence, she remembered, was how healing usually began. The night settled over Pine Hollow with the weight of something unfinished, the kind of cold that did not rush, but crept, pressing itself into the wood grain of the house and the bones of anyone awake inside it. The Grayson home had always made small sounds after dark, soft ticks from cooling beams, the distant sigh of wind slipping through pine branches. But that first night with Rook, every sound felt amplified, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Snow slid quietly from the roof in thin sheets. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and fell silent. Rook lay stretched along the inside of the front door, his body angled outward, massive shoulders blocking the threshold, as though the night itself might try to come in uninvited. Even at rest he was alert, amber eyes half open, ears twitching at every shift of air. His coat, coarse and uneven with old scars, caught the dim lamplight, revealing how much muscle still lived beneath the wear of survival. He did not relax the way domestic dogs did. He guarded because guarding had once kept people alive. Evelyn remained in the living room, refusing Noah's suggestion that she sleep in her bedroom. Her wheelchair was positioned near the fireplace, though no fire burned. She sat wrapped in a thick blanket, posture straight despite the ache in her spine. In the glow of the single lamp, her face looked carved rather than aged, lines sharp, eyes clear and awake. Sleep had avoided her for months, and tonight it stayed even farther away. She watched Rook the way she once watched wounded soldiers in field tents, quietly, constantly, waiting for the moment when everything went wrong. Noah pretended to read a report on his phone, though the screen stayed frozen on the same paragraph. He sat on the couch, elbows on knees, shoulders hunched forward, in a posture that mirrored the dog's vigilance. He hadn't taken off his boots. Some part of him didn't want to settle, didn't trust the night enough to remove armor. The sound came just after midnight. It wasn't loud, that was the worst part. A sharp crack echoed from the yard, followed by a hollow metallic rattle that vibrated through the walls. An old pine limb, heavy with ice, snapping under its own weight and slamming into the corrugated roof of the storage shed behind the house. The impact sent a shudder through the tin, producing a drawn-out tremor of metal on metal. Rook reacted instantly. His body exploded into motion, paws skidding across the hardwood as he slammed into the corner near the hallway. His breathing turned ragged, chest heaving as if he were running uphill through deep snow. His eyes went wide, unfocused, reflecting not the living room, but something vast and white and collapsing. A low sound tore from his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a cry, raw and broken. Noah was on his feet in a second. "Rook," he said, forcing his voice down, steadying it the way he'd learned to do over the radio during pile-ups and domestic calls. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe." But Rook couldn't hear him. His claws scraped uselessly against the wall as if he were trying to climb out of memory itself. The air filled with the sharp smell of fear. Noah took a step closer, then stopped himself. He remembered the shelter, Claire's warning, the way forcing closeness could shatter what little trust existed. He lowered his hands, breathing slow, grounding himself before trying to ground anyone else. Then the sound of rubber wheels rolled softly across the floor. Evelyn moved forward. She didn't rush. Her movements were deliberate, economical, the way they had been when she was younger, and chaos demanded clarity. She stopped a few feet from Rook and waited until his frantic eyes flickered toward her. Slowly, she removed one glove. Her hand looked older without it, veins visible beneath thin skin, fingers marked by time, but it was steady as she extended it, palm open, not reaching for him, simply offering space. "Easy," she said, her voice low and hoarse, shaped by nights of silence. "Easy, soldier." The word landed. Rook froze mid-tremor, his ears tilted forward, catching not the sound, but the tone. Evelyn had used that voice before, thousands of times, speaking to men who were bleeding out or shaking from shock, to boys who hadn't been boys for very long. It carried authority without threat, compassion without pity. "There's no mountain," she continued softly, "no snow coming down, just walls, just a house." Rook's breathing stuttered, his massive body lowered inch by inch until he crawled forward on his elbows, closing the distance like someone crossing open ground under fire. When his forehead pressed against Evelyn's knee, the tremor returned, but softer now, contained. Evelyn placed her bare hand on his back. Noah saw it before he understood it. The tremble that had lived in her fingers for months, the one that appeared when she reached for cups or folded laundry, simply stopped. Her hand flattened against Rook's fur, firm and calm, as if the act of anchoring him had anchored her too. The room changed, not dramatically. There were no revelations or tears, just a slow exhale from the house itself, wood settling, air warming. Rook leaned his weight into her touch, chest pressed against the wheelchair, eyes closing for a fraction of a second as his breath finally slowed. Noah swallowed hard. He had seen death. He had seen survival. But this quiet exchange between a woman who had lost everything and a dog who thought he had felt like witnessing something sacred and fragile. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually Rook pulled back and returned to his place by the door, lying down with his head on his paws. He didn't sleep, but he didn't shake either. Evelyn let her hand rest on her lap, noticing the absence of tremor with a distant kind of wonder, as if it belonged to someone else. "That was," Noah began, then stopped. He didn't have a word that wouldn't break the moment. Evelyn nodded once. "He just needed someone who wasn't afraid of him," she said. After a pause, she added quietly, "or afraid of remembering." The rest of the night passed in fragments. Rook drank water but refused food, sniffing the bowl once before turning away. Noah stayed awake until dawn, listening to the rhythm of the house and the dog's breathing. Evelyn closed her eyes but didn't sleep. She didn't mind. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone with ghosts. Morning came pale and hesitant, light filtering through frost-laced windows. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a world glazed in white. Noah brewed coffee while Rook paced the perimeter of the living room, alert but calmer. When Evelyn reached for her mug, her hand remained steady. She noticed it only when the cup didn't rattle against the saucer. Later that day, as Noah stepped outside to check the shed for damage, a familiar figure approached along the driveway. Martha Bell, the postal carrier, waved from the road. She was in her early 40s, tall and broad-hipped with a weathered face and dark hair tucked beneath a knit cap. Years of delivering mail through Idaho winters had toughened her stride and softened her eyes. She stopped short when Rook appeared behind Noah, massive and watchful. "That's a big one," she said carefully, adjusting her scarf. "New?" "Temporary," Noah replied again. Rook let out a low, warning rumble. Martha nodded, respectful, and kept her distance. "Looks like he's had a life," she said simply before handing over the mail and retreating without fear or challenge. Inside, Evelyn watched from the window. "He'll learn," she said. "So will we." That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees and shadows stretched long across the snow, Rook finally approached his food bowl again. He didn't eat much, just a few careful bites. But when he finished, he lifted his head and looked toward Evelyn, as if checking something unseen. She met his gaze. "Good," she said quietly. And for the first time since winter had taken so much from them both, the night felt survivable. The storm arrived without ceremony, the kind that swallowed sound and distance until Pine Hollow felt like the last place left on earth. Snow drove sideways across the yard, thick and relentless, piling against the windows and swallowing the narrow road that led down toward town. By early evening, the power flickered twice, lights dimming to a weak amber before cutting out completely. The house fell into a darkness broken only by the slow glow of a battery lantern Evelyn kept near her chair, a habit left over from field hospitals where light could not be trusted. Noah was not home. He was on overnight duty at the county station, helping coordinate patrols after reports of missing emergency gear began circulating through the valley. Over the past 2 weeks, several winter cabins had been broken into, Not for valuables, but for radios, flare guns, satellite beacons, and rescue packs. In a place where snow could erase roads in minutes, that kind of theft wasn't petty crime, it was dangerous. Someone without those tools could die before morning. Evelyn sat in the living room, wrapped in her blanket, listening to the wind claw at the siding. Her posture was straight despite the ache in her spine, shoulders squared as if bracing against more than cold. She had lived long enough to recognize the sound of trouble approaching, even when it hid behind weather. Rook paced near the windows, movements controlled and purposeful. His massive frame cut a dark shape through the room, shoulders rolling with quiet power. Since the night of the metal crack, something in him had shifted, not healed, not erased, but reorganized. The panic was still there, buried deep, but it no longer owned him. He paused at the back door, nose lifting as the wind forced new scents through the cracks. Snow, pine sap, and beneath it all, human. His ears snapped forward. Outside, a shadow moved along the fence line, low and careful. The figure wore a dark parka crusted with ice, hood pulled tight, face hidden behind a scarf. He moved with the caution of someone who knew he had little time and fewer chances. His name was Caleb Rourke, though Pine Hollow would learn it later. 32 years old, lean to the point of gauntness, with a beard grown uneven and patchy from weeks in the cold. He had once worked seasonal search and rescue support in another county until an injury and a string of bad decisions left him on the outside of the system he once served. Bitterness had sharpened him. Desperation had finished the job. Caleb reached the back door and worked a pry bar carefully into the frame, keeping pressure light to avoid noise. Ice cracked softly around the handle, a single sound, sharp, precise. Inside, Rook froze. His body snapped into readiness, hackles lifting, muscles locking into alignment. This was not the blind terror of before. This was recognition, purpose. He did not bark. He did not rush. He planted himself between the sound and Evelyn, head low, eyes fixed on the door as if marking coordinates. Evelyn felt the change in the room before she saw it. She followed Rook's gaze, heart slowing instead of racing. Training took over where fear might have lived. She reached quietly for her phone. The door creaked open just enough for cold air to pour in. Caleb slipped inside, boots barely touching the floor, breath fogging in the lantern's glow. His eyes flicked around the room, cataloging exits, threats, opportunity. Then he saw the dog. Rook stepped forward. A low sound rolled from his chest. Not a growl of warning, but something older and deeper, a command. It echoed through the room like a memory snapping back into place. Caleb swore under his breath and raised his flashlight, beams slicing across the walls before landing squarely on Rook's face. Amber eyes stared back, unblinking. "Easy," Caleb muttered, backing toward the kitchen. "Easy, boy." Rook surged. The movement was explosive but controlled, all muscle and training. He crossed the distance in seconds, slamming into Caleb's center of mass and driving him to the floor. The pry bar clattered away, skidding across tile. Caleb hit hard, the air forced from his lungs in a sharp grunt. Rook pinned him with his weight, one massive paw pressing into Caleb's shoulder, teeth bared inches from his throat, but not closing, never closing. Evelyn didn't scream. She dialed with steady fingers, voice clear despite the adrenaline burning through her veins. "Noah," she said when the call connected, wind howling through the open door behind her. "Come home, there's a man in the house." Noah didn't ask questions. He was already moving, coat half on, keys in hand. The truck tore through snow like a thing possessed, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through white. Inside the house, Caleb struggled, panic replacing calculation. "Get him off me," he shouted, voice cracking. "Get the damn dog off me." Rook adjusted his weight, growling once, short, sharp, enough to stop the movement. Evelyn wheeled closer, positioning herself where she could see both man and dog. Her face was pale but composed, eyes bright in the lantern light. "Don't fight him," she said calmly. "He's trained. You'll only make it worse." Caleb stared at her, shock cutting through fear. "Trained?" Rook's chest expanded as he drew breath, and then he barked. The sound was enormous, full-throated, alive. It filled the house, vibrating through walls and bones alike. It was the bark of a working dog reclaiming his voice, not in panic, not in confusion, but in certainty. Evelyn felt it in her chest, like a struck bell. Tears burned unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. By the time Noah burst through the front door, snow caked to his boots and jacket. The scene was frozen in place. Rook holding the intruder down with flawless restraint, Evelyn upright and unbroken, lantern casting hard shadows that made the room look like a memory burned into film. "Noah," Evelyn said evenly, "he's under control." Noah moved fast, weapon drawn, but lowered when he saw Rook's posture. He cuffed Caleb without resistance, hauling him upright. "You picked the wrong house," he said quietly, anger sharpened by relief. Caleb laughed once, breathless and bitter. "Guess I did." When the door finally closed behind the patrol unit that came to collect him, the storm outside seemed smaller, quieter. Rook stood in the living room, sides heaving, eyes tracking Noah as if awaiting the next command. Noah knelt in front of him, pressing his forehead briefly against Rook's massive skull. "Good boy," he whispered, voice thick. "You did perfect." Rook leaned into the touch, tail giving a single heavy thump against the floor. Evelyn watched them, hands resting calmly in her lap. She felt taller somehow, straighter, as if a version of herself she thought lost had stepped back into alignment. Later, as dawn crept pale and tentative across the snow, Rook finally lay down near Evelyn's chair, head resting against the wheel. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving the valley scarred but standing. And inside the Grayson home, a bark that had been buried under snow and silence had found its way back into the world. The invitation arrived 3 days after the storm, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope bearing the county seal, its edges still crisp, as if the paper itself hadn't yet learned how heavy the words inside would be. Noah stood at the kitchen counter, turning it over in his hands, feeling the faint tremor in his fingers that had nothing to do with cold. Winter Search and Rescue Memorial, Granite Pass. The date sat quietly beneath the heading, patient and unavoidable. Granite Pass was only 40 miles from Pine Hollow, but memory shortened distances. For Noah, it might as well have been yesterday. He could still smell the fuel and wet pine, still hear the radios cutting in and out as the mountain swallowed sound. Fear wasn't what tightened his chest now. Fear was loud. This was heavier. This was remembering who hadn't come back. Evelyn noticed the letter without asking. She sat near the window, the same olive coat folded across her lap, silver hair catching the pale morning light. Since the night of the break-in, she carried herself differently, spine straighter, movements more deliberate, as if some internal alignment had quietly corrected itself. Rook lay at her feet, head resting against the wheel of her chair, eyes following Noah with an attentiveness that was no longer anxious but aware. Evelyn read the invitation once Noah handed it to her, lips pressing together in a thin line. When she looked up, there was no softness in her gaze, only clarity. "If that dog can go back," she said lightly, almost teasing, "then my son can stop pretending he's still buried there." Noah huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't caught halfway. He knelt beside Rook, running a hand along the dog's broad neck, feeling the familiar strength beneath scarred fur. "You up for it, partner?" he murmured. Rook didn't wag his tail. He lifted his head and met Noah's eyes, steady and unflinching. It was answer enough. They left before dawn on the day of the memorial. Snow clung thinly to the road, more suggestion than obstacle, and the sky was a dull gray that flattened color into shape and shadow. Granite Pass rose ahead like a long-held breath, pines dark and solemn, rock faces glazed with ice. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat this time, refusing the wheelchair until they arrived. She wore a wool scarf tucked neatly into her coat, hands gloved but relaxed. Noah drove in silence, shoulders tight but controlled. In the back, Rook sat upright, eyes fixed forward, ears pricked as if the mountain itself were speaking. The memorial site lay in a wide clearing carved into the slope, marked by a low stone wall and a single metal plaque etched with names. Vehicles were already lined along the edge: county trucks, snowmobiles, a handful of civilian cars. People stood in small clusters, breath fogging the air, voices subdued. Some wore uniforms, others heavy parkas with faded unit patches sewn on by hands that remembered. Chief Harold Weller, a tall man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and a face cut deep by years of weather and command, greeted Noah with a firm nod. Weller had led the recovery effort 2 winters ago. He was known for being unyielding in the field and painfully gentle afterward. "Didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. Noah shrugged, eyes drifting toward the plaque. "Didn't think I wouldn't." Evelyn maneuvered her wheelchair into position near the front, accepting help only when it was offered without insistence. Her face remained composed, but Noah noticed the way her jaw tightened when she read the names. Rook stayed close, body angled protectively without being asked. Nearby stood Lena Brooks, a volunteer medic in her early 40s with cropped black hair and skin browned by years of mountain sun. She had been on standby during the avalanche response, handing out blankets and coffee to men who came back empty-handed. When she saw Rook, her eyebrows lifted. "Is that—" she began, then stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. Some questions weren't meant to be completed. The ceremony began without flourish. No speeches at first, just the wind moving through trees and the soft crunch of boots on snow. A bugler stepped forward, a young deputy with a narrow face and eyes too old for his age, lifting the instrument with hands that trembled slightly. The first note cut through the clearing, thin and sharp, then softened into something mournful and vast. Rook stiffened instantly, muscles locking beneath his coat. His ears flattened, breath quickening as sound echoed off stone and returned altered, multiplied. Noah dropped to one knee beside him, pressing his forehead briefly to the dog's, grounding them both. Evelyn leaned forward and placed her hand on Rook's collar, fingers closing gently but firmly, like setting an anchor. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're not there anymore." Rook trembled, then slowly lifted his head. The howl came out of him like breath he'd been holding for years. Long and low, it rose through the clearing and bounced off the canyon walls, layering itself into a chorus that felt ancient and alive. Conversation stopped. The bugle fell silent mid-note. Even the wind seemed to pause. Rook stood tall, chest expanded, tail still, voice carrying grief and release in equal measure. It wasn't pain, it was acknowledgement, a farewell given shape and sound. When the echo finally faded, no one spoke for a long moment. Chief Weller removed his hat. Lena wiped her eyes with the heel of her glove. Evelyn sat very still, tears slipping down her cheeks without sound, her hand never leaving Rook's neck. Noah felt something loosen in his chest, not disappear, but shift, like ice breaking just enough to let water move again. After the ceremony, people approached quietly, offering nods and hands and words that didn't try to be more than they were. Claire Morgan arrived late, breathless from the drive, auburn hair escaping her knit cap. She looked tired, but when she saw Rook standing calmly at Evelyn's side, something like wonder crossed her face. "He looks different," she said softly. "He is," Evelyn replied before Noah could answer. They stood together for a while, watching snow drift lazily through the trees. Claire cleared her throat. "There's a program starting in town," she said. "Animal-assisted therapy. Mostly veterans, first responders, a few retired medical staff. I thought—" She hesitated, then met Evelyn's eyes. "I thought you and Rook might help." Evelyn snorted gently. "I'm old." Noah smiled. "That just makes you credible." They began the following week in a borrowed room at the Pine Hollow Community Center, its linoleum floors scuffed and walls lined with folding chairs. On the first day, 6 people showed up. They came slowly, cautiously, like animals themselves learning a new space. Martin Hale, a former snowplow operator in his 60s, with a stooped back and hands permanently swollen from arthritis, sat closest to the door. Rebecca Quinn, a thin woman with pale skin and auburn hair pulled into a tight braid, kept her coat on the entire time, eyes fixed on the floor. Rook lay in the center of the room, calm and watchful, his presence heavy but reassuring. Evelyn spoke first, not about war, not about loss. She told a small story about learning to stitch in poor light and trusting muscle memory when sight failed. Someone laughed quietly. Someone else nodded. Rook lifted his head and rested it against Martin's knee. Martin's hands shook as they touched fur, then steadied. Rebecca eventually reached out too, fingers brushing Rook's ear, with reverence, tears dripping silently onto her sleeves. No one rushed her. No one needed to. Weeks passed. The room filled. Stories grew longer. Laughter appeared where silence once sat. Rook learned to move toward the quietest person, the one whose breathing went shallow, or whose hands curled inward. Evelyn learned that helping others stand didn't diminish her own grief. It gave it somewhere to rest. Snow continued to fall in Pine Hollow because winter still had its say. but it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a blank page. On one clear afternoon, as meltwater traced thin paths through the yard and sunlight warmed the porch boards, Noah watched his mother and Rook sit together, heads bowed toward each other like conspirators. He realized then that the mountain had given something back, not by returning the lost, but by teaching the living how to stay. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to give up, a wounded heart that chooses to love again, or a moment when broken souls are brought together at exactly the right time. Rook was not saved by strength alone. Evelyn was not healed by time alone. They were placed in each other's lives by a God who works through ordinary moments to create extraordinary healing. In our daily lives, many of us carry silent battles, grief, loneliness, memories that still ache. But if you're watching this right now, take heart. God is not finished with your story. Sometimes He doesn't remove the pain. He sends companionship, purpose, and love to help us carry it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us which part moved you the most. Your words may encourage someone else more than you realize. And if you believe in stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking these journeys together. May God bless you and your family, guard your heart, and guide every wounded soul back toward peace. And may you always remember, even in the coldest season, spring can still come. Amen.